Why did the forest feel so heavy that morning, like it was holding a secret no one was meant to see? Mist clung low to the ground, wrapping around the ancient evergreens of the Queen Wilderness like a veil. A lone figure moved with practiced silence, each step deliberate, each breath measured. At her side padded a Belgian Malinois, muscles taut, ears alert, eyes scanning every flicker in the shadows. Together they looked less like woman and dog, more like two predators, synchronized, cautious, alive to every change in the air. Lieutenant Aaron Blackwood was not new to this kind of silence. It was the silence of operations, the kind you don't break unless you have to. Yet, something about this morning unsettled her. Maybe it was the way the mist refused to lift. Maybe it was how Vortex, her canine partner, kept pausing as if listening for something she couldn't hear. Or maybe, deep down, it was the sense that she was standing on the edge of something that would change everything she thought she knew. She stopped by a fallen log and crouched low, pulling a weatherproof journal from her pack. Her sketches of terrain features and wildlife observations were meticulous, precise, an outlet for discipline and maybe a shield against thoughts she couldn't afford to have. Her pencil moved in deliberate strokes, yet her mind drifted back to nights when silence wasn't her ally but her enemy. Nights when she had lain awake, replaying the unanswered questions of her life. Why hadn't her husband come home? Why had the reports about that Afghan village never made sense? Why did every official answer feel like a door slammed in her face? She snapped the journal shut. No, she couldn't let herself wander there, not now. She tugged the high collar of her tactical gear a little higher, hiding the jagged scars that crept up her neck. Scars she had stopped explaining years ago. To most, they were evidence of a battlefield injury. To her, they were reminders, pain etched into skin, whispers of something she survived that others hadn't. Vortex stiffened suddenly, his body rigid, tail raised like a flag. Aaron's instincts sharpened in an instant. Her hand drifted toward the holstered sidearm at her thigh, her breath slowing until it was soundless. The dog wasn't wrong. Not once in the years they had worked together. Whatever he sensed, it was real. She followed his gaze down a slope where the mist pooled thicker, rolling like a restless tide. Through the shifting white she glimpsed a shape. At first it blended with the trees, a shadow among shadows. But as her eyes adjusted, the angles gave it away. Something geometric, something not natural. Her heart beat once hard, then again. What in God's name was that? With a subtle gesture she signaled Vortex forward. The dog lowered, advancing like a ghost, pausing every few meters to test the air. Aaron followed in silence, weaving through the dense underbrush. Years of training had made them extensions of each other. Where her eyes failed, Vortex's nose led. Where her footsteps faltered, his instincts corrected. The closer they got, the more the shape emerged from the mist. An aircraft. Her first thought was wreckage, perhaps some forgotten crash site. But as the details sharpened, a cold chill spread across her chest. It wasn't wreckage, it wasn't broken, it was whole. An Apache helicopter. Perfectly intact, perfectly placed. It sat there as if someone had landed it carefully, then simply walked away. The camouflage netting draped over it had collapsed under years of growth, ferns and moss crawling over the matte black hull like nature itself was trying to erase it. Erin circled wide, her trained eyes scanning for booby traps, pressure sensors, or telltale signs of perimeter security. Nothing. Not even the normal signs of decay she'd expect after years in the elements. The bird wasn't abandoned, it was hidden. Hidden well. She crouched low, studying the markings. The tail numbers had been scraped off, but faint impressions remained, just enough for her to recognize the care taken to obscure its origin. Every detail screamed one thing: this wasn't an accident. "Hold," she whispered to Vortex. The dog froze in place, eyes locked, posture coiled. Erin's hand brushed the cold metal as she climbed onto the step and pulled herself into the cockpit. Dust coated the surfaces, but everything inside was remarkably preserved. The controls looked dormant, not destroyed. Maps were still pinned to boards, their corners curled but intact. Her flashlight beam caught the glint of something in the corner, a logbook, its leather warped with age. She flipped through, her pulse quickening. The handwriting was rushed, clipped, like someone writing in stolen minutes. The final entry stopped her cold. Deployment authorized. God forgive us. Her throat tightened. She set the log aside and reached into the pilot's compartment, her fingers brushing against something wedged beneath the seat. She pulled it free. A worn photograph. A woman stood beside a man in flight gear. The man's eyes were sharp, his jawline familiar, too familiar. Erin froze. She had to steady her breathing before she dared to look again. The dog tags clinked softly as she lifted them from the same compartment. Major Lowell Corvvis, USMC. Her vision blurred for a moment. Not from the dust, not from the mist seeping in through the cracked canopy. From memory. Lowell Corvvis, her husband. Gone 7 years. Officially declared KIA in an incident that had never sat right with her. She had buried an empty casket, told herself closure would come with time. But here was his name, his face, his truth staring back at her. Her grip tightened on the tags until the edges bit into her palm. A storm rose inside her chest, equal parts grief, rage, and the faintest spark of hope. He had been here. This machine had been his, but what had happened to him? Before she could unravel her thoughts, Vortex pawed frantically at the floor panel beneath the seat, whining in the low tone he reserved for finds too important to ignore. Erin pried it open with her multi-tool, her breath catching when the panel gave way. Inside lay a waterproof case stamped with a black insignia she recognized immediately. Umbra Black, highest classification, the kind of clearance that lived above the reach of ordinary chains of command. Beside it, a titanium case gleamed, secured with biometric locks. Whoever had hidden this helicopter had left behind more than steel and rotors. They had left behind secrets. She photographed everything in place, then slid the cases into her pack, her mind racing with questions she wasn't ready to answer. She raised her radio. "Command, this is Blackwood, priority discovery, coordinates follow." Only static answered. She switched frequencies, tried again, nothing. Her sat phone, dead, no signal. Erin's skin prickled. This wasn't equipment failure. This was jamming. Someone didn't want this find reported. She looked at Vortex. His ears twitched, his eyes met hers, and in that instant she knew, whatever was happening here, they were already inside it. She whispered to him, almost to herself, "Something's wrong, boy, very wrong." The weight of the dog tags in her pocket felt like proof, the photograph like a wound, and the sealed cases. They were dynamite waiting to explode, truth packed tight enough to shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband, her command, maybe even her country. The forest was silent again, but it wasn't the peace of morning anymore. It was the silence before a storm. And in her gut, Erin Blackwood knew someone was coming. Why did the forest suddenly feel alive with eyes that weren't supposed to be there? Erin Blackwood crouched in the shallow darkness of her makeshift observation post, 800 meters from the hidden Apache. The afternoon had waned into night, and with it came the silence of hunters. Not the natural quiet of wilderness, but a silence shaped by human intention. Beside her, Vortex stirred. The dog's low growl vibrated like a warning drumbeat. Erin extinguished the tiny camp light she had used to study the recovered documents. She slipped her night vision goggles into place, the green haze sharpening into detail. Movement. At first it was just the faintest flicker through the trees. Then shapes resolved, 8, maybe 10, advancing with eerie precision. No chatter, no clumsy breaks in formation. Their hand signals were crisp, their spacing disciplined. Operators. Her chest tightened, not rescue, not recovery. These men weren't here to help her. They were here for what she had found. Vortex pressed closer to her side, ears forward, muscles quivering. She laid a hand on his flank, steadying him. Her breath slowed, pulse steadying into that razor edge between instinct and control. She counted. 8 near the ravine, 2 sweeping wider flanks. 10 in total. But what unsettled her wasn't the number. It was the absence of insignia. No unit patches. No visible ranks. Just black gear, featureless helmets, silent rifles. Ghosts in the night. Whoever sent them didn't want records, didn't want names. Her radio had been jammed. Her sat phone had been cut. Now this, a net was closing. Erin withdrew deeper into the rocks, her body pressed against the limestone's cold surface. She had trained in evasion countless times, but training never accounted for this, being hunted not by an enemy, but by shadows who might very well be wearing the same flag she had sworn to defend. Her eyes flicked to her pack, heavy with the titanium case and umbra-black documents. Evidence. Truth. Dangerous enough that someone had deployed professionals to erase it, and her along with it. She thought of the photograph. Lowell's face frozen in time. His dog tags, warm from her touch, now resting heavy in her pocket. He had been entangled in whatever this was. She had found the proof. And now, because of it, she was prey. The first team reached the Apache. 2 slipped into the cockpit, their headlamps flicking on, faint beams cutting through the mist. The others fanned out, securing perimeter. She watched as frustration crept into their movements. Compartments searched, seats overturned, empty. They hadn't found what she carried. Her stomach knotted. They would assume the evidence had been taken, which meant they would hunt until they found the thief, until they found her. Vortex shifted, his sharp eyes catching something overhead. Erin followed his gaze just as the shadow of a drone swept across the clearing. A faint hum followed, mechanical wings slicing the quiet. Another sweep from the west. Then the south. A coordinated grid. Her blood ran colder. This wasn't just a recovery team, it was an operation. Whoever wanted the Apache silenced had deployed more than boots on the ground. They had brought drones, signal jamming, full-spectrum pursuit. She reached for the titanium case, her fingers brushing its cold surface. She knew the odds. She could leave it, run light and fast with nothing tying her down. Survival would be easier, but survival without purpose was nothing. She had lived in that shadow for 7 years, haunted by half-truths. She couldn't run now, not when the proof was here in her hands. The lock shimmered under her touch. Retinal scan, fingerprint. Systems designed to keep out everyone except the one authorized, Major Lowell Corvvis. Her husband. Her throat tightened. Her husband who had trusted her enough in his last log to say, "If anything happens to me, Erin is the only one I trust with this." Her fingers trembled just for a heartbeat before her discipline reasserted itself. She set up her field kit. Tiny tools, delicate work. She breathed shallow, her focus narrowing to the tumblers and fail-safes as she bypassed the lock's mechanics. 30 minutes. 40. Each second stretching long as the sounds of the search below drifted up toward her. A soft hiss, the case opened. Inside, technical schematics, a hardened military thumb drive, documents marked with project codes, and then the video files. She inserted the drive into her rugged tablet, Vortex keeping silent watch beside her. The screen flickered to life. Lowell's face filled the display. Erin's heart seized. She hadn't seen him move in years, hadn't heard his voice except in fading memory. Yet here he was. His eyes were tired, hollow, but burning with conviction. "This isn't combat," he said, voice taut with rage. "This was a field test, an atmospheric incendiary system, codenamed Thanos, designed to suffocate human life while leaving structures intact, tested on a village in Afghanistan." Erin's breath stopped. Lowell's face filled the dark around her, every word cutting deep. 47 civilians, not insurgents, families, children. They burned the air from their lungs while houses stood untouched, and command ordered it covered, ordered me silenced, ordered the records destroyed. His voice broke. For a second the soldier vanished and only the man remained, the man she had known, the man she had loved. I can't live with it, and I won't let them bury it. If anything happens to me, Lieutenant Blackwood is the only one I trust. The video cut off with rotor sounds, shouting, then darkness. Erin sat frozen, the weight of truth pressing down like stone. Her husband had died for this. His blood was on the ground because he had chosen to resist, and now she held the burden he had tried to pass on. Vortex pressed his head against her hand, a silent grounding force. She stroked the fur absent-mindedly, eyes burning though no tears fell. There was no room for them, not here, not now. The drone overhead shifted its arc, sweeping closer. Voices carried faintly from the ravine. Orders, sharp, controlled. The search team had realized the evidence was missing. And if they hadn't already, they soon would. Erin powered down the tablet, secured the evidence, and melted back into the rocks with Vortex. Each movement was deliberate, trained. They moved uphill, higher into jagged terrain where heat signatures blended with stone, false trails scattered behind them. She whispered into the darkness, "They won't stop, boy, not until they have it, not until they silence us too." Vortex's only reply was the steady trust in his eyes. For 3 nights they moved like ghosts, through rivers to mask scent, across ridges where drones lost line of sight, through caves where thermal scans would struggle. By day, they burrowed into makeshift hides, silent, still, invisible. Erin studied the schematics when she dared, piecing together the scope of what she carried. Each revelation was worse than the last. Thanos wasn't theoretical, it was operational, ready. And the Afghan village hadn't been an accident, it had been a test site. Her husband had died trying to bring this truth to light, and now she carried the mission forward. On the dawn of the 3rd day, the forest opened to the edge of a highway. This was supposed to be her extraction route. A simple training exercise was supposed to end here, with an unmarked vehicle collecting her and Vortex. Instead, she saw them. Black SUVs, military transports staggered every quarter mile, containment net, waiting for her. Erin's breath slowed as she pulled back into cover, her mind racing. She was boxed in, drones overhead, operators behind, roadblock ahead, the walls of the wilderness closing tight. She crouched, stroking Vortex's neck, her voice a whisper only he would hear. "We knew this could happen. Contingency plan, boy." From her pack she pulled weatherproof memory cards, copies of the most damning evidence. She slid them into a hidden pouch in his tactical vest, along with a handwritten note. Names, coordinates, contacts. The path forward if she fell. She met his eyes, steady, unblinking, as she gave the command. A command they had rehearsed but never truly wanted to use. Vortex's body tensed, his gaze locked on her one last time. Then he turned, disappearing into the underbrush, running perpendicular to the highway. Erin exhaled, the ache in her chest sharp. She had just sent away her partner, her anchor, her only true companion, but it was the only way. She rose, adjusted her collar, secured the pack with the original case inside, and then she stepped onto the asphalt, hands open at her sides, walking into the net. Engines roared to life. SUVs surged forward, black-clad operators poured out, rifles raised. And from the lead vehicle stepped a figure Erin recognized instantly. Silver hair, immaculate uniform, a predator's calm. Colonel Emmett Thorne, Deputy Director of Special Weapons Development, the man whose name had threaded through whispers of cover-ups for years. Erin's jaw tightened. The hunt was over, the confrontation had begun. What happens when the hunter finally looks into the eyes of the prey and realizes she isn't afraid? The night air was sharp against Erin Blackwood's skin as she stood in the center of the highway, headlights burning into her from both directions. Vehicles boxed her in, black SUVs with tinted windows and unmarked military transports humming low with power. Armed men fanned out in perfect formation, rifles leveled, every scope a steady eye on her chest. And then he emerged. Colonel Emmett Thorne. The man's reputation had traveled further than his name. Silver hair cut with military precision, his uniform immaculate even in this desolate wilderness. He moved with an ease born of authority, the kind of authority that bends others without raising a voice. His steps were measured, not hurried. He was a man who believed he had already won. "Stand down," he commanded his men, his voice steady, clipped, resonant with a confidence that brooked no resistance. The rifles lowered only slightly, but their fingers never left the triggers. Erin kept her shoulders squared, her hands loose at her sides, her pulse steady despite the fact that every weapon within reach could end her life before she finished a breath. Thorne stopped a few paces from her, circling slowly, his eyes flicking over her gear, her scars, her stance, studying her the way a predator measures an opponent before deciding how to strike. "We've been looking for you, Lieutenant," he said evenly. Erin didn't blink. Finding your helicopter must have set off a few alarms. Thorne's lips curved faintly, but it wasn't a smile. "Interesting. Most operatives would have reported such a discovery immediately. Yet you chose to investigate, almost as if you knew what you were going to find." Her jaw tightened. "Reconnaissance protocol, assess before reporting." Thorne shook his head slowly, like a teacher correcting a naive student. "No, there's nothing standard about you, is there?" The way he said it made something inside her twist. He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "Or should I say Major Corvvis?" Her body went still, too still. Inside, her stomach dropped, her mind racing. But on the surface, she betrayed nothing. "My name is Lieutenant Blackwood," she replied evenly, her voice level cold. "Check my record." Thorne's expression darkened with amusement. He gestured to an aide who stepped forward with a tablet. With a flick, the screen illuminated her face. Younger, different uniform, hair cropped shorter, but unmistakable. The name beneath the photo made her chest constrict. Major Erin Corvvis. Military intelligence, weapons assessment, presumed dead. Her husband's file had been there 2 years ago, marked KIA. She had thought she had buried her life with him, hidden it beneath scars and silence, reinvented herself as Blackwood. But here, before Thorne, her carefully constructed identity unraveled in seconds. "You thought you could disappear," Thorne murmured. "Change your name, change your branch, hide in plain sight, but scars." His eyes flicked to the jagged burn marks along her neck, visible even above her collar. "Scars don't lie." Her hand twitched toward her collar instinctively before she forced it down. 7 years of discipline, 7 years of survival, all stripped away in a moment. She straightened, her voice cold. "You engineered the incident, my husband, the village, all of it." Thorne's expression didn't change, though a shadow crossed his eyes. It wasn't an operation. It was a field test, a regrettable one with unintended results. Her words came low, but they carried the weight of years. 47 civilians, doctors, aid workers, and Lowell wasn't killed in your test, was he? He was killed after, because he planned to expose you. For the first time, Thorne's mask slipped, just for a flicker. His jaw tightened, his gaze sharpened with something darker. Then it was gone, replaced with the smooth calm of authority. "You've been useful," he said finally, gesturing toward the wilderness behind her. "The helicopter wasn't carelessly hidden. It was placed there 6 weeks ago. We've been tracking you, Major, watching you circle closer for years. We knew eventually you'd find our breadcrumbs. And you did, exactly as we expected." Erin's breath caught, not in fear, but in realization. "You used me," she said, the truth spilling sharp in her mouth. "Used me to find what Lowell left behind." Thorne nodded once, almost admiring. "The Thanos files, the original drive. We've been searching for those for 7 years. And now, thanks to you, we know they still exist. Tell me where they are and this can end quietly." Erin forced a slow exhale. "Gone, destroyed." Thorne's head tilted, studying her face. Then he gestured. His men advanced, 6 operators, restraints in hand. Aaron's mind raced. Fight. Die here on an empty highway, the truth buried once more. No. Survival mattered, delaying mattered. Vortex had the copies. Somewhere out there, running through the underbrush with his mission encoded in muscle memory. If she could buy time, just enough, then Lowell's truth would reach daylight. The operators closed in. And then, a sharp whistle pierced the night. Not hers. From the tree line 30 yards away. Head snapped toward the sound. And out of the shadows came Vortex, his body low, eyes locked, every line of him alive with tension. Aaron's heart leapt, but froze again when she saw he wasn't alone. 3 figures emerged behind him. 2 carried cameras already filming. The third wore a federal marshal's uniform, credentials raised high. Colonel Thorne, her voice cut across the night, sharp with authority. I'm U.S. Federal Marshal Kessler. This operation is unauthorized. You are detaining a U.S. service member without jurisdiction. Thorne's face tightened, fury barely contained. This is a classified military operation. You have no authority here. Not according to the Joint Chiefs, Kessler shot back. We received an evidence packet 6 hours ago, enough for a federal judge to issue an emergency order. Lieutenant Blackwood, Major Corvvis, is not to be detained, and everything you're doing right now is being recorded. Aaron's chest swelled with a quiet relief so sharp it almost hurt. Her contingency plan. Lowell's plan. It had worked. If she disappeared, if she missed her check-ins, everything she had gathered would be released, and it had been. She met Thorne's eyes across the distance. 3 days, she said softly, almost for herself. That's all I needed. Thorne's expression twisted as realization struck. She hadn't been running to escape. She had been running to stall. Every evasion, every misdirection, just time. Enough time for the evidence to reach hands that couldn't be bought. You knew, Thorne hissed, his voice low, venom curling in each word. You knew we were coming. Aaron unzipped her collar slowly, deliberately, pulling it down to reveal the full extent of her scars. The raw, ragged burns that crawled across her neck, her chest. She let the headlights illuminate them, let the cameras capture every inch. I was there, she said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving his. In that village, on a humanitarian mission. I watched your weapon burn the lungs of children while their houses stood untouched. I hid underwater in an irrigation ditch and listened to them die. I survived, and I've carried their screams for 7 years. For the first time, Thorne's eyes widened. Recognition flickered. Aaron's voice didn't waver. My husband tried to stop you. You killed him for it. Now the world will know. The standoff thickened. Thorne's men shifted, uncertain. Some lowered their weapons slightly. The cameras captured everything. The colonel's face, his fury, her scars, her testimony. A deep thrum split the air, the rhythmic chop of rotors. All heads turned skyward as 3 Blackhawks descended, dust whipping across the highway. These bore insignia, real insignia, military police. Doors swung open. Tactical squads poured out, weapons ready but pointed not at Aaron, at Thorne. And at their lead stepped Admiral Sarah Acaffer, stern, uncompromising, a woman whose word carried the Joint Chiefs behind it. Her voice cut through the rotor thunder. Colonel Thorne, by order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you are relieved of command pending investigation into unauthorized weapons testing, falsification of combat reports, and conspiracy against the United States military. Silence. Then the click of safeties disengaging as Thorne's men hesitated, caught between chains of command. Acaffer's voice rose like steel. Stand down or face charges of mutiny. One by one, rifles lowered. The black-clad operators dropped their weapons to the asphalt. Thorne's jaw clenched, his eyes burning as restraints closed around his wrists. He leaned toward Aaron as MPs pulled him back, his words for her ears alone. This isn't over. Some secrets stay buried for the good of the nation. Erin's reply was ice, not this one. Vortex pressed against her side, a steady presence as the storm broke around them. Cameras rolled, authority shifted, truth clawed its way into the light. And for the first time in 7 years, Erin felt the faintest crack in the weight pressing her down. The battle wasn't over, but the silence was. What does justice feel like when it finally arrives? Too late for the dead, but just in time for the living. The rotors from the Blackhawks had barely stopped spinning when the highway shifted from chaos to order. Military police swarmed the scene, their movements crisp, their chain of command unquestionable. Colonel Thorne's operators stood restrained, stripped of weapons and authority, their black uniforms now looking less like power and more like shame. Erin stood still amid the storm, her posture rigid, Vortex planted firmly at her side. She watched as MPs escorted Thorne toward the waiting helicopter. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes never left hers. Even in chains, his gaze carried the weight of threat. Silent, cold, a promise that power never truly dies, it only retreats. But for the first time in years, Erin didn't flinch. Admiral Sarah Ockafer approached, her uniform immaculate even in the dust-strewn chaos. She walked like a woman carrying the weight of an entire command, every step measured, every gesture deliberate. When she stopped before Erin, her gaze softened just enough to acknowledge scars, both the visible ones etched across Erin's skin and the invisible ones buried deeper. "Lieutenant Blackwood," she began formally, though her eyes said she already knew the truth. Then more quietly, or should I say Major Corvvis. The name landed heavy. Erin had lived so long without it, buried beneath false records and fabricated files. Hearing it aloud felt like exhumation, like the ground opening beneath her feet and pulling the past to the surface. Erin straightened, forcing composure. "Admiral, I can explain my actions." Ockafer studied her with the calm of someone who already knew the explanation. "Your actions," she said, her voice steady, "likely prevented a serious breach of military ethics from being buried forever." The words struck harder than Erin expected. Praise was foreign to her now, after years of silence, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Her throat tightened. She looked away briefly, grounding herself on the familiar weight of Vortex pressing against her thigh. Ockafer's hand dipped into her pocket. When it emerged, metal glinted in the headlights. Dog tags. Erin's breath caught before she even saw the inscription. "Your husband's remains," Ockafer said, her voice lower now, quieter, touched with the solemn gravity of truth. "Recovered years ago, misfiled under a false identity. Hidden. That will be corrected. He will receive a proper burial with full honors." The tags dropped into Erin's palm, cool and solid, biting against the calluses of her skin. She closed her fist around them, her composure fracturing just slightly. 7 years she had carried a void. Now she held something real. Her voice was quiet, trembling on the edge of control. "And the others?" Ockafer's eyes hardened with resolve. "The investigation begins tonight. Thorne wasn't alone. We already have names, senior officials who approved and funded projects outside command authority. The Joint Chiefs have authorized a complete review. Nothing buried, not anymore." Erin inhaled, her lungs filling with the cold night air, and for the first time in years it felt like she could breathe without weight pressing on her chest. "The evidence," Ockafer said, nodding to Erin's pack. "What did you find?" Erin's jaw set. The complete schematics for Thanos destroyed. Her voice was firm, unyielding. "The world doesn't need that weapon. I kept only what was necessary to prove the truth." For a long moment Ockafer studied her, testing, weighing, then she nodded once decisively. "I believe you." And then, with the precision of ceremony, the Admiral raised her hand in salute. Erin's chest tightened. Slowly she returned it. 7 years of silence, of doubt, of exile, and now acknowledgement, recognition. Not as a ghost, not as a failure, but as what she had always been, a soldier who carried on. The salute dropped. The night air thickened with the scent of jet fuel and dust. Around them, order reigned, MPs processing the black-clad operators, securing the Apache site, documenting evidence. Yet all Erin could feel was the cool bite of dog tags in her palm and the steady presence of Vortex at her side. "You saved us from ourselves tonight, Major," Akafor said quietly, "and it isn't over." Erin nodded, her jaw tight. She knew it was. Truth had surfaced, but truth alone didn't heal wounds. Justice would take longer, accountability even longer still. And grief had its own timeline. 6 months later, Arlington National Cemetery stood quiet beneath a pale morning sun. The crisp air carried the faint scent of cut grass and spring blossoms, but for Erin the world narrowed to the flag-draped coffin before her. Major Lowell Corvvis. The headstone already stood, etched in clean lines. Defender of truth, ultimate sacrifice. The honor guard moved with precision, rifles polished, boots striking in perfect unison. A chaplain spoke words about duty, sacrifice, and silence. Words Erin had heard countless times at other funerals for other warriors. But this time, each syllable pressed against her like a blade. Vortex sat beside her, perfectly still, the model of discipline. Only his eyes betrayed anything, fixed on her as if he knew the weight she carried. Erin stood straight, her naval uniform crisp, her rank restored. The scars on her neck showed plainly now, no longer hidden beneath collars and shadows. She had stopped concealing them. They were truth etched into flesh, reminders of what she survived and what others didn't. Around her neck hung 2 sets of dog tags, Lowell's and her own. The rifle salute cracked the morning silence. Each shot reverberated through her chest, 7 years delayed but not denied. As the folded flag was placed into her hands, Erin's fingers trembled only once. She clutched it to her chest, holding back the tide of grief threatening to overwhelm her. The ceremony concluded, the crowd thinned, but Erin remained. Kneeling beside the fresh earth, she reached into her pocket and drew out the photograph she had found in the Apache. The 2 of them, side by side, long before the fire, before the scars, before the silence. She set it carefully against the headstone, her fingers lingering as though by touch she could bridge the years that had stolen him away. "I finished it," she whispered, voice raw. "I brought it into the light for you, for them." Her eyes closed briefly. For a moment she let herself feel the weight. Then she opened them again, looking forward, always forward. From a respectful distance, Admiral Akafor stood watching. Her presence wasn't for spectacle, it was respect, a quiet acknowledgement from one warrior to another. Later, Akafor joined her, the grave still fresh between them. "The investigation is complete," she said quietly. 8 officials indicted, funding networks dismantled, families of the victims acknowledged, reparations authorized. Erin nodded, her gaze still fixed on Lowell's name carved into stone. "And something more," Akafor continued. "The Joint Chiefs have authorized a new division, independent, accountable directly to civilian oversight, a watchdog for ethics in all branches of the military, and we need someone to lead it." Erin turned then, eyes weary but steady. "You want me to?" "We need someone who knows the cost of silence," Akafor interrupted. "Someone who will stand for truth no matter the price." Erin looked back at the headstone. Lowell's name, her name, their mission, their burden. Slowly she nodded. "When do I start?" Akafor's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile but something close. "You already have." Weeks later, the Pentagon corridors buzzed with energy as Erin stepped into her new office. On the wall hung a framed photograph, not of herself, not of Lowell, but of the Afghan village before it burned, a reminder of why this work mattered. Her desk bore a new case file, Southeast Asia, discrepancies in reports, shadows in familiar patterns. Justice, she knew, wasn't a single act, it was a mission. She looked down at Vortex, sprawled at her feet but alert as always. His ears flicked, his eyes steady, as if asking the silent question they both carried. Are we ready to fight again? Erin's answer came without hesitation. Always. She picked up the file, walked toward the conference room where her hand-picked team waited. 7 years of silence had ended. Now came the work of making sure silence never buried truth again. And as she stepped into the light of her new mission, she carried with her the memory of Lowell's words, words that had guided her through fire, scars, and loss. Honor the oath, not just the orders. What happens when a soldier becomes the very thing she once feared, a keeper of secrets? The Pentagon's corridors hummed with a quiet intensity that only those who worked there could recognize. To most, it was just another government building. But to Erin Corvvis, no longer Lieutenant Blackwood, no longer hiding, it was a labyrinth of decisions, compromises, and power. Here, battles weren't fought with rifles. They were fought with information, policies, silence, and exposure. She walked past portraits of admirals, generals, leaders carved into history. None of them bore scars like hers. The burn marks climbing her neck were unhidden now, etched into every handshake and every introduction. For years she had concealed them behind collars and shadows. Now she wore them openly. They weren't wounds anymore, they were truth made visible. Her office was functional, not ornate. Walls lined with case files. Maps pinned with strings connecting incidents, whispers, lies. A single framed photograph dominated the space. The Afghan village, rooftops intact, shadows frozen before the fire stripped breath from lungs. A reminder, a vow. Vortex lay at her feet, head on his paws, his ears twitching at every unfamiliar step outside. To others, he was just a dog. To her, he was memory, anchor, shield. The only creature who had witnessed the darkest nights and remained unbroken. A knock. Captain Jada Wheeler entered with her usual directness. Once a JAG Corps prosecutor, now Erin's deputy director. She carried herself with clipped efficiency, a woman who trusted process and law more than instinct, but who had learned to trust Erin because Erin had survived what no process had prevented. We've secured Oversight Committee approval for the Southeast Asia operation, Wheeler reported, sliding a file across the desk. We move at 800, full access granted, no interference. Erin glanced down. Redacted lines, inconsistencies in field reports, signatures that didn't match chain of command. The same pattern she had chased for years. Shadows that looked too much like Thanos to be coincidence. Her jaw clenched. It's the same playbook. Wheeler's voice tightened. Do you expect resistance? Erin's eyes lifted to hers, steady, unflinching. Count on it. The captain nodded, leaving without further debate. Erin leaned back, the file heavy in her hands. This was the work now. Not one mission, not one revelation, but an endless grind against shadows. And she had traded her rifle for something heavier, responsibility. But responsibility came with solitude. Weeks later, the cemetery grass was still damp when Erin found herself back at Lowell's grave. Arlington had grown familiar in a way she never expected. She came here not for closure, because closure was a myth, but for calibration. Every decision she made in her new role came back to this soil. Vortex sat beside her, as still and respectful as any soldier. She brushed her fingers across the headstone. They think I'm strong, she whispered. But some nights I feel like I'm still that woman hiding in a ditch, listening to people die. The silence gave no reply, but Vortex's head pressed gently against her arm, grounding her. She closed her eyes. Lowell's mission had ended in fire. Hers had only just begun. 3 months into her command, Erin's name had already spread through corridors she had never walked. Word moved quickly in the military, especially about the rarest of things, someone who refused to bend. Applications to Special Forces programs surged, especially from women. In training compounds across the country, candidates whispered her name. Not Lieutenant Blackwood, Not the ghost major, but Erin Corvvis, the woman who carried her scars openly, who stood against a colonel, who dragged the truth into daylight when everyone else looked away. The first time Erin saw them, she didn't know how to react. She had been invited to observe a training exercise at Coronado. Rows of candidates, drenched in sweat and seawater, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion. And yet when they saw her, when they recognized her, something shifted in their posture. A tightening, a lift, as if her presence itself meant something. It startled her. She wasn't used to being seen. For years she had hidden in shadows, pretending to be someone else. Now these young women stood taller because of her. After the exercise, one candidate broke formation. She approached nervously, hesitating until Erin nodded. "Ma'am," the young woman said, her voice raw with fatigue but edged with conviction. "We just wanted to thank you for showing us what it really means to serve." Erin studied her, a face too young to know what real loss tasted like, eyes burning with determination that hadn't yet been tested by betrayal. Her throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "Honor the oath, not just the orders." The candidate's back straightened, the words locking into her like armor. "Yes, ma'am." Erin nodded once. The words weren't hers. They had been Lowell's, but passing them on felt right, his voice living through hers, guiding the next generation. Later, alone in her quarters, Erin looked at herself in the mirror. The scars glared under fluorescent light, unflinching. Once she had hated them. Now she realized they weren't just hers anymore. They belonged to every recruit who needed to know survival was possible. They were a banner, a warning, a truth. Her work at the Pentagon was relentless. Each file revealed another shadow, another corruption buried in the name of necessity. Some days, she wondered if the machine was too big, if her new division was just another attempt to put a human face on a system that always found ways to hide. But then she remembered Lowell's last log, his eyes hollow, his voice breaking as he said this wasn't combat, this was a test. And she would keep answering him. One evening she sat in her office long after others had left. The rain streaked the windows, the capital city glowing faintly in the dark. Vortex stirred at her feet as she flipped through photographs of the Afghan village. The walls still stood, the people didn't. Her chest ached. A knock at the door. Wheeler entered again, softer this time, her usual precision muted. "You should rest." Erin didn't look up. "Rest is a luxury I can't afford." Wheeler hesitated. "Do you regret it, exposing it all?" Erin finally met her gaze. Her voice was quiet, weighted. "Every day and not once." The words hung heavy but true. Regret and resolve weren't opposites. They lived side by side. She turned back to the window. "Lowell used to say dignity doesn't speak, it acts. I didn't understand it then, I do now." Wheeler nodded silently, then left her alone again. Erin touched the scars at her neck, feeling them like scripture. She wasn't healed, she never would be, but healing wasn't the point. The point was that she was still here, still fighting, still carrying. The mission had changed, but it hadn't ended. Months later, in a closed briefing with senior oversight officials, Erin presented her findings on the Southeast Asia discrepancies. Her voice carried no theatrics, no embellishment, just fact, documented, verified, irrefutable. When she finished, silence filled the room. The kind of silence born not of disbelief but of discomfort, because truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. One official finally cleared his throat. "Do you realize the political consequences of pursuing this?" Erin met his eyes, steady. "Do you realize the moral consequences of ignoring it?" The silence deepened, and in that silence Erin felt Lowell's presence, not as memory, as reminder. She walked out of the room with Vortex at her side, the path ahead uncertain but clear in one way. She wouldn't turn back. Her scars no longer dragged her into the past. They marked her as the one who survived to carry the burden forward. And sometimes, survival wasn't about living for yourself. It was about living for those who couldn't. What happens when the battlefield isn't a desert or a forest, but a conference room filled with men who refuse to be questioned? Aaron Corvvis sat at the head of a polished oak table deep inside the Pentagon. The room was sterile, windowless, humming with artificial light, but the tension inside it was anything but sterile. It pulsed, it breathed, it resisted. Across from her sat generals, admirals, civilian contractors, and political liaisons, all called to answer for discrepancies her division had uncovered in the Southeast Asia operation. Reports that didn't match, numbers that didn't align, signatures that looked forged, a pattern too familiar, echoing Thanos like a ghost. She didn't wear rank on her sleeve here. She wore it in her scars, in the way her voice cut clean through excuses. Operation Talon Strike was authorized as a counterinsurgency action, one general said flatly, leaning back in his chair. Casualty numbers were consistent with hostile engagement, nothing irregular here. Aaron slid a folder across the table, photographs, civilians lying in neat rows, structures untouched, air scorched from the lungs of the living, not shrapnel wounds, not gunfire. Her voice was calm, but it carried steel. These people weren't combatants, and these structures weren't damaged. The strike didn't look like combat, it looked like testing. Murmurs rippled across the table. Some faces tightened in denial, others looked away. "You're suggesting another unauthorized weapons trial?" a civilian contractor asked sharply. "I'm not suggesting," Aaron replied. "I'm documenting, and if the evidence continues to align, I'll be confirming." The room bristled. One admiral leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Major, with respect, do you understand the political fallout of your claims? You're talking about destabilizing entire branches of command. You're undermining trust in the system itself." Aaron's eyes locked on his. The system undermined itself the day it chose convenience over truth. "Silence." The words hung there like a blade. Beside her, Captain Wheeler shifted her notes, her voice crisp, filling the pause. "Our division exists because of that failure. Oversight isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. If accountability shakes trust, then the trust wasn't built on anything solid to begin with." Aaron felt the smallest flicker of gratitude toward Wheeler. The woman's precision balanced Aaron's fire. They were two edges of the same blade. Still, as the meeting dragged on, Aaron felt the resistance thickening. Every question she posed was met with a deflection. Every fact she laid bare was countered with language polished by years of bureaucracy. Classified, miscommunication, fog of war. By the end, no resolution had been reached, only walls. When the room cleared, Aaron remained seated, staring at the empty chairs. Her chest was tight, her scars prickling against her collar. For years she had fought enemies she could see. Now she was fighting shadows that smiled across polished tables. "Are you all right?" Wheeler asked quietly, gathering files. Aaron shook her head, her voice low. "I don't know if this is a fight we can win." Wheeler paused, then said evenly, "Then it's exactly the fight we have to take." Aaron exhaled slowly. She didn't argue, but doubt lingered. That night, Aaron found herself at Lowell's grave again. She hadn't planned to go, but her feet carried her there, as if instinct knew where her heart needed to recalibrate. The cemetery was dark, the lamps casting long shadows over rows of marble. She knelt beside the stone, her fingers brushing the cold letters of his name. "I thought facing them with truth would be enough," she whispered. "But truth doesn't move them, not like it should. They hide behind their ranks, their politics, and her throat tightened. I don't know if I can do this without breaking." The night wind rustled the grass. Vortex pressed close against her side, solid, steady, breathing with her. Aaron closed her eyes. She could almost hear Lowell's voice, not as memory but as echo. "Dignity doesn't speak, it acts." Her eyes opened again. She inhaled sharply, centering herself. Action. That was the way forward, not waiting for permission, not asking for acceptance. Action. She rose slowly, the weight still there, but lighter somehow. The next day, Erin walked into her office where her team was gathered. Analysts, investigators, field operatives, hand-picked from every branch, all of them chosen for one reason. They weren't afraid to question. On the wall, the map of Southeast Asia glowed under pinned lights, markers showing locations of suspected strikes. Erin didn't bother with preamble. We're hitting resistance from above. That means we're close, too close. If they're trying to bury this, it's because there's something to bury. She met each pair of eyes in the room. We move forward, full investigation, subpoenas, witness protection if we have to, and if they try to shut us down, we make it harder for them to do so. The team nodded, resolve hardening. Erin turned to Wheeler. Get me the names of field officers who signed off on the Talon strike reports. If their signatures don't match, we'll find out who forged them. Her voice was steady now, no hesitation, no doubt. For the first time since taking the role, Erin felt the shift. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was leading. Weeks bled into months. The investigation dug deeper. Witnesses emerged. Files surfaced, some leaked anonymously, others smuggled by insiders who whispered they'd had enough. Patterns crystallized. And with them came the pressure. Anonymous threats slipped under her office door. Phone calls with dead air. Men in suits who smiled too wide and asked too casually if she was comfortable in her new role. One evening, as she drove home, a black SUV trailed her for 30 blocks before vanishing. The message was clear. Vortex sensed her tension, his hackles rising even before she noticed the headlights. Erin didn't spook easily, but she wasn't naive. She was being watched. When she told Wheeler the next morning, the captain's jaw tightened. We need to raise this to Akafor. Erin shook her head. No, that's what they want. They want us to flinch, we don't. But later, alone in her office, her hand brushed the scars at her throat. A reminder of fire, of silence, of survival. She had flinched before. She wouldn't again. Her breakthrough came on a rain-soaked afternoon. A young lieutenant, nervous, eyes darting, hands trembling, slipped into her office with a sealed envelope. I shouldn't be here, he stammered. They'll ruin me if they know I came. Erin's voice was calm. You're here because you know what's right, sit. He obeyed, sliding the envelope across. Inside, field logs, unredacted, coordinates, dates, test notes that matched patterns from Thanos. Her chest tightened as she scanned the pages. Oxygen deprivation metrics, civilian casualty ratios, precision strike outcomes. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what she held. She looked up at the lieutenant, his eyes brimmed with guilt. I was there, he whispered. I watched children collapse in the streets. We were told they were insurgent families, but I knew. Erin's throat burned. You did the right thing by coming here. He shook his head, his voice breaking. Too late for them. Her gaze softened. Not too late for the next. Vortex pressed his head against her leg, grounding her. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This was the crack in the wall they needed. That night, as rain lashed against her office windows, Erin stood alone, staring at the unredacted files. Her scars itched, as if memory itself was burning through her skin. She whispered into the empty room, to Lowell, to the silence, to herself. They'll come for me again. Maybe harder this time, but I'm not hiding in ditches anymore. I'm not burying evidence, not burying the truth, not burying myself. Her reflection in the glass stared back. The scars were harsh, but behind them her eyes burned steady. Vortex stirred at her feet, his gaze fixed on hers, loyal, unwavering, ready. Erin placed her hand on the stack of files, her decision made. Action. If dignity doesn't speak, it acts. Then she would act until the walls themselves cracked open. The mission wasn't vengeance anymore. It wasn't even justice for Lowell. It was protection, for the oath, for those who couldn't speak, for those already buried by silence. And for the first time, Aaron felt not just the weight of scars, but the strength of them. What happens when the enemy you're hunting isn't outside, but sitting across the table, smiling? The files from Southeast Asia sat spread across Aaron's desk like fragments of a shattered mirror. The young lieutenant's testimony had been clear. Civilians targeted, structures untouched, the pattern unmistakable. The documents confirmed it. Another Thanos, another test. She stared at the pages long into the night, the hum of the Pentagon around her thinning into silence as the building emptied. Only Vortex remained, steady at her feet, his eyes following every shift in her breathing. Her scars prickled. She felt it again, the sensation of being hunted. By morning, the first signs appeared. One witness scheduled for debriefing failed to show. Later, he was reported transferred without her authorization, reassigned to a remote outpost overseas. Another source went silent altogether, his phone disconnected, his barracks emptied. Aaron's stomach twisted as realization settled. They weren't just resisting her investigation anymore. They were dismantling it, piece by piece. At the next staff briefing, her team filed in, faces tense. Wheeler sat at her right, jaw tight, eyes flashing with the same recognition Aaron felt. They were being boxed in. Aaron spoke plainly. "We're losing witnesses. Records are vanishing. Someone is leaking our moves." The room went still. Every face shifted, some shocked, some defensive, all unsettled. She scanned them, her voice firm. "We've been infiltrated. Someone in this room is feeding them." The words hung heavy, a weight no one wanted to carry. Her hand pressed lightly against the folder in front of her. The truth was inside it, but truth didn't protect itself. Wheeler broke the silence. "Then we need to move faster, before they shut us down completely." Aaron nodded, but inside doubt gnawed. Who could she trust? That night as she drove home, the feeling of being watched returned. A black SUV slid into her rearview, headlights steady, keeping distance but never turning away. Her hand hovered near her weapon. Vortex growled low in the back seat. At the next intersection, the SUV pulled closer, too close. Aaron braked suddenly, hard, forcing it to swerve. She caught a glimpse of faces inside, unmarked uniforms, eyes hidden behind tinted glass. No insignia. The SUV didn't pass. It simply lingered, a shadow reminding her, "We're still here." She tightened her grip on the wheel, her scars itching like fire beneath her collar. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the SUV had vanished, but the message remained. She wasn't just being resisted, she was being hunted again. Days later, betrayal revealed itself. A secure cache Aaron had hidden, a backup of the unredacted files, was gone. Broken lock. No alarms, no sign of forced entry, just gone. Her chest constricted. She had trusted only 3 people with its location. Wheeler froze when Aaron told her, "Someone on the inside." Aaron's voice was raw, "Someone on our team." The sting cut deeper than gunfire. In combat, betrayal was fast, brutal. Here, it was slow, corrosive, eating from within. She paced her office, Vortex tracking her every move, his ears flicking at the tension vibrating in her voice. "I can't protect them if they don't want to be protected," she muttered, half to herself, half to the silence. Wheeler's eyes softened. "This isn't about protecting them. It's about protecting the ones who can't even speak, the ones already gone." Aaron stopped, breathing deep. She pressed her hand against the scars on her throat, a reminder of fire, of silence, of survival. "You're right," she said finally, "but it doesn't make the betrayal any lighter." The next oversight hearing confirmed her worst fears. Aaron sat before a panel of officials, her evidence laid out, her voice steady. She presented the patterns, the files, the testimony. The truth was undeniable. But instead of action, she received pushback cloaked in civility. One senator leaned forward, his tone carefully measured. "Major Corvvis, while your dedication is admirable, the conclusions you've drawn are speculative. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and much of what you've presented here is circumstantial." Aaron's jaw clenched. "With respect, sir, the evidence is solid. You're looking at it." Another official adjusted his glasses, voice cool. "And yet witnesses have disappeared. Records have gone missing. Without them, your case lacks the weight required to justify the disruption you're proposing. The military cannot function if we investigate every irregularity as treason." Her scars burned. She wanted to slam the files down, to scream that the missing witnesses weren't accidents, they were being silenced. But screaming wouldn't save the truth. So she sat straighter, her voice even. "The military cannot function if we bury war crimes under paperwork and call it stability." The room went silent, eyes flickered, some hostile, some shamed, some unreadable. But when the session ended, Aaron walked out with nothing but heavier files and lighter hope. That night she didn't go to the cemetery. She couldn't. Instead, she sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds. Vortex lay beside her, head resting on her lap. She stroked his fur absently, her voice breaking the silence. "Am I doing the right thing, boy? Or am I just dragging ghosts through the mud?" Vortex's eyes lifted to hers, steady, loyal. No hesitation. She swallowed hard. "Lowell would have told me to keep going, but Lowell died for it, and her voice cracked. "I don't know how much more I can lose." The silence pressed heavy. She leaned her head back, eyes stinging. "Sometimes I think the scars weren't the price I paid. They were the receipt, a reminder that the cost never ends." But even as she said it, she knew stopping wasn't an option. Not for her, not anymore. The turning point came in the form of a single envelope, slid under her office door late one night. No markings, no return address, just a single drive inside. Aaron loaded it cautiously, her tablet scanning for traps. None, only video files. She clicked the first one. A grainy recording filled the screen. Soldiers in unmarked gear. A village in Southeast Asia. Civilians rounded into a square, their faces frightened, confused. Orders barked in English. A device deployed, compact, metallic, humming low. The camera shook as the operator tried to hold it steady. Then silence. People dropped one by one, clutching their throats, gasping for air that wasn't there. Buildings stood untouched. Children collapsed beside their parents. Aaron's hand clenched into a fist, her breath ragged. The footage was raw, unedited, proof. The second file opened. A debrief. Officers speaking in code but clear enough to translate. Field test complete, oxygen displacement successful, casualties within projected range. Her vision blurred with rage. This was it, not speculation, not patterns, proof. But proof was also danger. Whoever had delivered it to her had signed their own death warrant. She sat back in her chair, her scars burning like open wounds, the video replaying in her mind long after the screen went dark. This wasn't just about Lowell anymore. It wasn't even just about Thanos. This was systemic, repeated, planned. She whispered into the silence, her voice raw, trembling with both fury and resolve. "They'll try to bury this. They'll bury me, but not this time, not again." Her eyes flicked to the photograph on her wall, the Afghan village before the fire. No more graves for silence. Vortex shifted, pressing against her side as if to anchor her words into the present. Aaron rose, gripping the files, the drive, the weight of it all. The next move wouldn't be cautious. It wouldn't be hidden. It would be loud. Because some truths weren't meant to survive in shadows. They were meant to burn in the light. What happens when silence can no longer hold the weight of truth? Aaron Corvvis stood at the threshold of a decision that would define everything, not just her career, not just her survival, but the meaning of the scars she carried. The unmarked envelope sat open on her desk, its drive still humming faintly in her tablet. The video files were seared into her mind. Civilians choking in a square, children collapsing while their homes stood untouched, soldiers calling it a test. Proof. But proof was dangerous. Proof could be stolen, erased, buried like so many bodies before. She closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the cool edges of Lowell's dog tags around her neck. He had died trying to bring the truth to light. She had survived, which meant the mission was hers now, and the mission demanded a choice. Keep it in the system and watch it disappear into classified vaults. Or take it outside, loud, public, irreversible. Her scars burned. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. By dawn, her decision was in motion. Captain Wheeler entered the office to find Erin already standing at the head of the conference table, her team gathered, files stacked, drive secured. Her voice was steady, controlled, but there was a fire beneath it that everyone in the room felt. "We're not waiting for permission," she said. "We're not waiting for oversight to stall or for committees to water this down. The footage is clear. The documents are clear. What we have is enough to break this open if we act now." One analyst frowned, hesitant. "Ma'am, if we go public without authorization." Erin cut him off. "They've been hiding behind authorization for years. That's how Thanos happened. That's how Lowell died. That's how those villagers died. Authorization means nothing without accountability." The room fell silent. Erin leaned forward, her voice lower now, intimate but sharp. "I didn't build this division to make people comfortable. I built it to make sure silence doesn't kill again. If you're with me, then understand this will make enemies. Big ones. But if we do nothing, then we're already their accomplices." The weight of her words hung heavy, but one by one heads nodded, Wheeler most of all. Erin straightened. "Then it's decided we leak, carefully, controlled, enough to force oversight into the light where no one can bury it again." The leak hit within 24 hours. The footage went public. Major networks carried it. Families of the dead saw faces they recognized. Lawmakers demanded answers. International outrage surged. And the Pentagon shook. Erin watched from her office as news anchors repeated phrases that had lived only in her nightmares. Civilian field tests, atmospheric suffocation weapons, unauthorized operations. She heard politicians stammering, generals scrambling, and knew there was no putting this back in the dark. But she also knew the storm was coming for her. The first call came from an unknown number, a man's voice, clipped and cold. "You think you've won, but you've just made yourself the biggest target in the world." She hung up without answering. The second call came from Admiral Akafor. Her tone was sharp but steady. "You forced our hand. The Joint Chiefs are convening emergency hearings. They're furious, but they can't deny it now." Erin's reply was quiet. "Good, let them be furious. Fury means the truth is out." The hearings were brutal. Erin sat under the harsh glare of cameras, her scars visible under the fluorescent lights. Senators grilled her. Generals sneered. Contractors deflected. One senator leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. "Major, do you understand what you've done? You've compromised national security. You've embarrassed this institution on the global stage." Erin's voice didn't waver. National security isn't served by murdering civilians and calling it progress. Institutions don't deserve pride if they're built on lies. Gasps rippled through the chamber, cameras flashed, but Erin didn't flinch. She remembered the faces in the video. She remembered Lowell's final words, and she spoke as if he were beside her. "I swore an oath, not to protect lies, not to protect careers, to protect people. And if that oath costs me everything, then so be it, because dignity doesn't speak, it acts." Silence swept the chamber, heavy, irrevocable. After the hearing, Erin walked out into the cold air of Washington, Vortex packing at her side. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. She ignored them all, her eyes on the horizon. Wheeler caught up with her, her voice low. "Do you think it will be enough?" Erin paused, the wind tugging at her uniform, the weight of dog tags pressing against her chest. She exhaled slowly. "Enough for justice. Maybe not. Enough to change everything. Maybe not. But enough to make silence impossible. Yes." She glanced down at Vortex, his steady eyes fixed on hers. "And sometimes that's all we can do, make silence impossible." Weeks later, Arlington again. The cemetery was quiet, morning light spreading across rows of white stone. Erin knelt at Lowell's grave, the grass damp beneath her knees. She placed a new photograph against the headstone, not the old one of them in Afghanistan, but a recent image. Her, standing in uniform before the oversight committee, scars bare, eyes steady. She whispered softly, "It's not over, it'll never be over, but I carried it, Lowell, I carried it for you." Her voice broke then, but she didn't fight it. For once, she let it. Vortex pressed against her side, steady, grounding. She rested her hand on his head, the silence of the cemetery wrapping around them both. From a distance, she heard footsteps. A group of young female SEAL candidates approached quietly, their posture respectful, their eyes drawn to her. They didn't need to speak. Their presence said enough. Erin rose slowly, meeting their gazes. One of them whispered to the others, "That's her." The weight of it pressed on Erin, but it didn't crush her. It steadied her. As she passed them, one candidate stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "Ma'am, you've shown us what it means to wear the uniform." Erin paused, her eyes softening. She remembered the girl's determination, her fire. She offered her a single sentence, the same Lowell had once given her. "Honor the oath, not just the orders." The candidate straightened, her eyes fierce. "Yes, ma'am." Erin walked on, Vortex packing at her side. The horizon ahead was uncertain. The battles weren't finished, but something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. Months later, the new division, Project Corvvis, buzzed with life inside its secured wing of the Pentagon. Analysts, investigators, lawyers, soldiers, all working not to build weapons, but to protect against the misuse of them. On the wall, a simple motto was inscribed beneath the framed photograph of the Afghan village. "Truth is the only shield worth carrying." Erin stood by her office window, watching rain sweep across the city. In her hand, another case file, another shadow waiting to be dragged into the light. She touched her scars briefly, no longer ashamed, no longer hiding. They weren't just reminders of survival anymore. They were proof of endurance, proof that silence hadn't won. Vortex stirred at her feet, lifting his head, watching her with steady eyes. Erin's voice was soft but firm. "Ready, boy. Another fight for the quiet ones who can't speak." The dog's ears perked, his gaze unwavering. Erin turned toward the conference room where her team waited. The path forward was endless, but her steps were steady. Because sometimes victory isn't explosions or banners. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let silence bury the truth. And as she walked, her husband's words carried her, echoing into the present like a vow reborn. Honor the oath, not just the orders. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.